Hey folks, hope you're doing well today. I have some quick thoughts for you on Spiral from the Book of Saw, which I watched last night. It's going to be quite a relaxed video. It's not going to be super edited. This is more of a casual vibe, just sort of coffee, carnage and conversation. That sort of thing. This is actually tea, but I thought tea, torture and talk no, that doesn't work for me as much. We're going with coffee, carnage and conversation, okay? Nice. I'm glad you're on board. I'm currently working on something on Saw 3, a defense of it, highlighting things that I think have been missed by people, and that's partially contributing to why I think the film has kind of a harsher reputation than it deserves. And that's going to be quite heavily edited, trying for something really high quality. And because of that, I was sort of more interested than I would otherwise be in checking out Spiral. I also thought the presentation from the trailer looked quite interesting. I mean, Chris Rock and Samuel L. Jackson in a Saw movie is weird. It's weird, it's intriguing, and liking both those actors, I wanted to see it for that. There's definitely a curiosity factor. I'm also probably a lot more forgiving of the Saw series than most people, so all these things led to me wanting to check it out. And I saw Spiral from the Book of Saw last night, and I just figured I had a lot of thoughts on it that I wanted to get out for you quickly, because I'm not going to be around for the next 2 weeks, so there won't be a live stream on Tuesday. If you want some extra content from me, you can look at the playlist for the live streams, or I've also got a specially curated best of playlist that you might want to check out. Those are all the videos that I'm really proud of, that I really hope more people would watch, so I highly recommend you checking that playlist out if you haven't checked it out already. But as for Spiral from the Book of Saw, what do you make of that title? What does from the Book of Saw mean? It's quite awkward, isn't it? My interpretation of that is that Spiral from the Book of Saw was most likely originally a script that was just called Spiral, that was completely unattached to anything in the Saw universe, and has been retrofitted so that it takes place in the Saw canon. Now that's not actually unusual. Obviously it happens in games, Silent Hill 4, The Room, that was retrofitted. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, if you are quite flattering towards the film, if you're quite charitable, you would probably point out that Saw 2 was also retrofitted in this way from a script by the director Darren Lynn Bousman, who was also brought back to direct Spiral and I guess give it a sort of authenticity, that buy-in, and sort of help make it feel a bit more consistent. But if you're not feeling charitable, you might point out that it's the same process that happened to the later Hellraiser movies. So it's up to you how charitable you're feeling. That is my guess. I'm thinking Spiral was most likely just a retrofitted script that was about more timely political issues, and that they decided to graft it onto the Saw universe to try and make it more marketable. So what are the impacts of it being retrofitted? Well, for a start, it basically means that this is bait. Yeah, the film feels a bit off, and it really isn't an easy fit for the Saw universe. The connections to the Saw universe are very superficial in this effectively sort of spin-off model that we've got going on. So that means that basically, if you are curious about any Saw universe world building after the events of Saw 7, if you're wondering what happened to the rest of the Jigsaw disciples, you will never know. The disciples of Saw are briefly name-checked, but they make no appearance. There is no additional knowledge we gain about them, so you are not really building on any of the old storyline. That's fine, I guess. But you also have weird things like this scene with Samuel L. Jackson.
You want to play games? Monkey fight!
Now, in a film set in the Saw universe where the Saw traps and games, whatever you want to call them, have taken a lot of lives in a very gruesome and grisly manner, is that really the reaction that you are going to have to realising that you're in one of Saw's games? I'm not sure about that. That seems kind of like the standard Samuel L. Jackson reaction. rather than anything authentic to the Saw universe. It also means that you get some really weird statements that make no sense in the universe. So this, for instance.
Well, what do you think about this whole Jigsaw angle? You think it's, what do you call him, one of those disciples?
John Kramer didn't target cops.
Saying John Kramer as Jigsaw never targeted cops is completely wrong. I mean, this is pretty basic stuff, right? From Detective Eric Matthews in Saw 2 through to Detectives Kerry and Rigg in 3 and 4. Yeah, Jigsaw targets cops a fair amount. That's pretty common. It was kind of actually overemphasized in the storyline, if you ask me, and I felt it had kind of a negative impact on the overall Saw plotline. But to say it didn't happen is extremely weird. It's a very basic mistake, and I don't know why Darren Lynn Bousman, who directed Saw 2, Saw 3 and Saw 4, I don't know why he let that one go through.
John Kramer didn't target cops.
What you talking about, Willis?
That's a weird one. That had me scratching my head. But the fact that Spiral is bolted on to the Saw universe doesn't really bother me. It's kind of like a Scrubs Season 9 sort of thing, in the sense that the original storyline is done. It is completed. Everyone has got their resolutions. That is done and dusted. And it was actually quite a while ago that was done. So the fact that they've come and added something on and sort of experimented and gone kind of wild and got this very different vibe, this much more sort of black influence on it with Chris Rock and Samuel L. Jackson, it's fine actually. It's just like the futuristic thing that they did with Jigsaw. It's a different take on the storyline that doesn't affect or corrupt the original storyline at all. So why not? Go for it. I think that's kind of cool. Does this mean we get Jigsaw in space? There's only so long you can go in a horror series before someone has to go to space, and we're 9 entries into this series now. I think we're overdue for it, right? Jigsaw in space, come on. I should probably lay out the basics of the plot. I'm not going to go deep into spoilers at all. I'm going to be very superficial in this. The only big spoiler I'll discuss right at the end, and I'll warn before it, so don't worry about that. Effectively, the film is following Chris Rock as the protagonist, who is the good cop in a very corrupt cop world. He gets assigned a new partner, which he's not really happy about, and he fights to take on the case of hunting down the Jigsaw imitator who is taking out corrupt cops. How can I say, the Chris Rock makeover of Saw... Sorry, how can I say, the Chris Rock makeover, the sort of more black influence on Spiral, and the themes of it, I kind of instantly said jokingly at the start, like, I really hope this is not going to be sort of ham-fisted anti-police BLM messaging. Kind of is. Kind of is, disappointingly. I'm sorry about that. I mean, I was wondering all the way through, is this going to be a twist? Like, the killer is only targeting corrupt police. And I thought, okay, they're getting that in there, and it's going to be a setup. It's going to be subverted. There's going to be a twist. No, there is no twist. I'm not ruining a twist. I could maybe be accused of spoiling the lack of a twist. But I'm afraid what you see is what you get. It is it's a film very focused on the awful, almost uniformly terrible corrupt police. And the killer at the end gets a decent speech, just sort of laying out the case that the police are awful, systemically corrupt. Systemically is distinctly mentioned. They can't be trusted to reform themselves, and so the people have to step up and do something, maybe something drastic, to change the situation for the better and bring justice. So that messaging is very clear, but you might counter that. You might say, no, this film is not pushing that, because they put that viewpoint in the mouth of a torturing, murdering psychopath. Maybe not even a psychopath, but let's say a torturing murderer or a murdering torturer. And that should be enough to make you question that viewpoint and how much it's actually being supported by the film. But I would say the counter to that counter, the thing I would look for is there any rebuttal to the argument? And no, there isn't. There is no intellectual rebuttal to that message. Chris Rock at no point gives anything that intellectually challenges that point of view. So yeah, I'm going to go with this film has a very anti-police focus. It's this was probably the intense focus of the original script, and it was sort of probably that timeliness was the impetus for it to get made, and then it was most likely retrofitted into the Saw universe so that it would be a bit more marketable. It's a sensible marketing choice, but as I've said, it has some awkward impacts on the quality of the film. Now, on the other hand, because I do really want to lay out some positives, Chris Rock is pretty good in this. He is basically still Chris Rock. He doesn't do all that much seriousness, but the stuff that he has to do, I think he does very competently. And the guy's charisma really carries you through the film because you can watch him forever. He's fantastic. Same with Samuel L. Jackson. He's a delight in this. The chemistry that Chris Rock and Samuel L. Jackson have as father and son is delightful. They needed more scenes together because it was an absolute hoot. I don't think I've laughed out loud in a Saw film since the first one with some of the statements that came from Adam. Chris Rock brings a really fun energy to the film, and the sort of more typical stylization that he brings at the start fades quite quickly into something that fits more in the Saw universe. It also doesn't then feel as dour as I felt 7 and 6 did. Even though I've got to say, I've got quite a soft spot for 6. I'm probably a bit too lenient on that one. Now, even though Chris Rock is bringing this quite fun energy to the film, part of the problem is the believability is quite low. As I've said, he's just doing the Chris Rock thing. And he doesn't make for a particularly convincing police officer. In fact, the whole setting within a police environment is, I would say, extremely unconvincing. Really, really just not convincing at all. In the days of Line of Duty, The Wire, The Shield, I think we are used to a more mature, more realistic depiction of police units and how they function. Spiral really looks like it's wearing a sort of rough costume of a police department, but the way people behave, the absolute over-the-top behaviour and unprofessionalism, it's drawn with a very, very large brush. It's not subtle, and I've got to say it's not convincing, to be honest. That sort of took me out of it a bit, and you might say that's more in keeping with the later Saw films, that sort of realism wasn't their speciality, and it's like they were better at it early on in the day, and I think having returned to it after quite a while, I think it's been a good long while since we last had a Saw film. I think that might be something they might have wanted to correct in this film, and they just didn't. So we don't have that believability. It's essentially what I'm trying to say is the police elements in this feel very cartoonish, which does not help with believability. And if you don't have believability, it's quite hard to be emotionally connected. Now, the other thing that makes it quite hard to get emotionally involved and invested in the film is basically no one is likable. No one is likable. As I've mentioned, this is a film about corrupt police. They're horrible people. Every character, except basically Chris Rock and Detective Schenk, his apprentice, basically, they're just basically awful people. And so when they are put into the torture machines, which there aren't actually that many of in this movie, that's fine as well. I think later films we just had too many of them. The balance is probably about right in this one. Because all the people in the games are just awful, awful humans who you want nothing to do with, it's hard to care as much. So even though they're nicely designed traps and they're quite grisly, it was only really one of them. Let's say it was the less digital one, if you get me, was the one that really made me wince. The rest, not so much. They also really seem to not care as much about believability in the sense that they end up, minor spoiler, they end up setting up one of the machines in the basement of a police department. You start asking yourself, how did they set this up down there? How did they move all the equipment down? How did no one notice? Don't think about it too hard, I guess. Another thing that really stood out to me about Spiral is the way that the story is delivered, because I would say a big problem with the film is that the story, the plot, isn't really driven by anyone. Now, by quite fun coincidence, the last film I watched before Spiral was 1979's When a Stranger Calls, which, by the way, is quite fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Very atmospheric, very unusual. The formula, the sort of formulaic nature of horror, not there at all. I think it's 1979, so it hasn't really settled in yet. If you haven't seen When a Stranger Calls, definitely watch that. It's very interesting. But in both that and Spiral, the plot isn't really driven by anyone. And that really shouldn't be an issue in a police procedural, because there should be a case, which there is, and a detective who wants to solve it, which there also is. Chris Rock should be driving the discovery, finding things out, and moving the plot forward. But the fact is that he doesn't. He is very bad at doing this, and he can't find things. He investigates, he finds a body, and then he comes to a dead end. So the plot moves along when the killer wants it to. How does that happen? Well, there is a device throughout the film, which also makes it feel very timely, of Chris Rock being delivered little packages from the killer that contain clues and information to drive it forward. Now, I've been thinking about working on a video about just how indebted the original Saw is to Seven from David Fincher. Like, there really is quite a lot of overlap, and I want to have a bit of a think of it and make a proper video of it. But maybe enjoy pondering that yourself. Because really the connections and the thematic links between Seven and Saw are really quite compelling, I think. I think there's a very good case to be made. Now, one thing that Seven does, and I'm avoiding spoilers here, I'm going to be quite oblique. Effectively, the third act in that film only happens because the killer chooses to. You know, there's a delivery that the killer makes that sets the third act in motion. If you've seen the film, you know what I mean. But that's an interesting thing because it feels like quite a fun subversion there, that the detectives are doing their own thing, but then the killer just comes in and turns it all around and starts driving the story. In Spiral, like, that is really, really clear. Like, that is turned up even more. So if Saw is indebted to Seven, Spiral is doubly so. The film is just replete with Chris Rock's protagonist receiving deliveries of packages from the killer that tell him where to go and what to do and what to look for. The film doesn't really go anywhere unless a killer wants it to, which is kind of a problem. Compare it to the original Saw and how detectives tap and sing through, methods of varying credibility, manage to investigate and find clues and find themselves to Jigsaw's location in order to surprise him and sort of turn the tables on him. That was a lot more engaging because our protagonists were people who were making things happen and driving the plot. Here, because the plot is being driven by the killer and the killer deciding to send packages, it feels very much out of the hands of the protagonists, the people who should be in charge, the people who should be driving it. That is something of a problem. It's something of a mistake. It means that even though Chris Rock is bringing a lot of charisma to it, Spiral feels somewhat directionless. And that's a problem that's sort of compounded by the fact that we don't really like anyone we're spending any time with. You gotta have those likable characters. There's also a minor detail that really annoyed me in this film, and probably annoyed me far more than is actually merited, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. It's a kind of petty detail that I found very distracting, and it's that Chris Rock was not happy to have this apprentice, okay? He is not happy that he's been assigned Detective Schenk. But, you know, they're working together, and at the end of that first day, he says to Schenk,
Hey, William.
Yeah.
Good work today.
I had to pause because I was saying, hang on, what good work did he do? We didn't see him do anything that actually was worthy of the praise or anything out of the way that would really earn that kind of admiration from Chris Rock's very grouchy character. The only thing I think he actually did that was, you know, particularly worth highlighting was he managed to spot a package in daylight. I think that was his big contribution that day. So this whole, good work, kid. Why? It felt like a kind of line left in from a first pass, like that's just the kind of thing you'd say on the first day, but it's not really connected to any action that we actually saw take place. It bugged me a lot. I guess we might as well get into those spoilers now. I'm not going heavily into it, but I did work out who the killer was. I'll briefly discuss it now, so if you don't want to be spoiled, that's fine. Skip ahead to this time code and you'll be absolutely fine. I worked out that the killer was the new apprentice, Schenk. About halfway through, I started getting an inkling. You have corrupt cops consistently targeted. Schenk is not corrupt, and then he goes missing. But he's someone we don't get a definitive body for. Now, having seen a fair number of Saw films, I was looking for a twist. I was expecting one, and so I was kind of primed for this. When Chris Rock receives one of these packages and it contains a piece of skin with Detective Schenk's tattoo on it, the other clue I had was that because the key message of the Saw films is that you have to make a painful, torturous sacrifice in order to improve yourself and get what you want. It sounds kind of wholesome when I put it like that, doesn't it? Yeah, it's kind of wholesome. Yeah, good stuff. My thought was, given that that is the main idea of the series, Detective Schenk has just cut off the skin with his tattoo on it as his painful sacrifice to get what he wants. And then he's faked his death via a skinned body. Now, he did fake his death via a skinned body, I was correct in that, but he didn't even do the arm slicing himself. I thought that was a little weak. That maybe would have been a good change to the script to make it more consistent with the Saw universe, but as I've already highlighted, this film is not massively consistent with the Saw universe, so it's a missed opportunity. And this raises another problem, which is that if a skinned body has been passed off as Schenk, then how is this not going to be very quickly realised via height checks, via dental checks, via blood types, via DNA? And the answer is, well, it's maybe not such a big problem because at that point, Schenk is moving very quickly and he's going off-grid basically the second that he's completed his mission in the finale. He's planning to go off-grid, so it doesn't really matter to him that the police have his photo, dental, DNA, anything they would need to track him really. he's going to disappear into his life of crime. So yeah, it maybe doesn't make much sense, but the film is basically just sort of rushing you through on a fairly fast pace at that point, trying to just get you through the plot, and maybe the idea is you're just not meant to really think about it and ask too many questions, which you could say is fairly in keeping with the later Saw films. That I don't think that would be an unfair criticism. My only other quibble was over whether or not Schenk had an accomplice himself, which is also very in line with the rest of the Saw universe, but he didn't, and I was wrong, so that's fine. And the final problem that I wanted to throw in that I was really annoyed by is that there is a very cheap reference to the original, with Chris Rock being put in the sort of original scenario of being chained to a pipe and handed a hacksaw. My cat is probably going to meow any second. Don't do it, Gatsby. We're doing so well on the recording. We're flowing so nicely. Don't do it. He's benevolent. So Chris Rock finds himself tied to a pipe with a hacksaw, and he's given the original scenario that was offered to Adam and Dr. Gordon in the first... Thank you, Gatsby. In the first Saw film, will you cut off your foot to free yourself? A very relatable scenario, something you can very easily imagine. And you even have the original Hello Zepp music play, or a variation of it plays. But then he gets out of it really quickly by sort of breaking out of the handcuffs with a paperclip. It's very cheap. I think it was done just for the trailer. It kind of annoyed me that they threw that in at the last minute and then didn't really do anything with it. That bugged me. So that's all the spoilers covered. So that's kind of everything I wanted to cover about Spiral in this. I did have a sort of strong urge to talk about it after watching it last night, and I hope you don't mind the very light editing and script-free, maybe even a tad rambly way I've done this. But if you don't mind the coffee, carnage and conversation format, I might be able to get a few more videos out if you want maybe just a quicker take on something. As for the essential question about Spiral from the Book of Saw, should you see it? Probably not. It's kind of fun. It's definitely not the worst of the Saw films, but it's decidedly kind of mediocre. If you have strong political feelings, the anti-police message might annoy you quite a bit. If you have a very sort of anti-cop feeling yourself, then you might not be bothered by that. If you're just really interested in seeing horror with a sort of more black influence, then you might like this, but there are better ones. I'm going to recommend Candyman. I'm gonna hold myself off there. Although Candyman is the obvious recommendation, I'd probably throw you a curveball and suggest you try either the old school People Under the Stairs with a wonderful Ving Rhames cameo, and there's also a very unexpected CC8 pounder turn in the quite unexpectedly good Psycho 4. Like, that really has no reason to be as good as it is. I've got a real soft spot for that one. Yeah, it's not atrocious. It's pretty competent. It's kind of nice being in the world again, but you do realise it doesn't actually do anything with that world, and it really was just grafted onto the Saw universe in a fairly unconvincing way. It feels a bit cheating, to be honest, but it's not offensively bad. It's just kind of okay, and given that there are so many better films out there at the moment, I'd probably just suggest you go and watch those instead. So yeah, I can't really recommend it. I can't rage against it. I feel pretty meh about it. As I mentioned earlier, because I'm not going to be around, we are going to miss 2 double feature horror shows, but we are going to be back on the 29th of June with a really good episode focused on The Descent, an absolute crowd pleaser, and also I think I've probably gone a bit too easy on the co-hosts there. I think they're ready for something a fair bit scarier, so we're going to go with The Descent. So as I mentioned, if you're really missing the double feature horror show live streams, I have included the playlist of the live streams and a playlist of my curated sort of personal favourites from the channel. And I will see you again on the 29th of June for our next live stream. That's all from me. Thanks, y'all. Tschüss.